Hi, welcome to the Daily Dose of Anime Recaps. In this video, we'll be taking a look at episodes 5 through 8 of Psycho-Pass. In a dystopian future of Japan, a person's brain is scanned and their propensity for crime is given a numerical value. The higher the number, the higher the likelihood for crime. Before we begin, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon to be sure you don't miss the next episodes. We start out with Inspector Akane, meeting virtually with Spooky Boogie. Spooky Boogie criticizes Akane for failing and vows to never help the police again. Afterwards, Kogami asks Shion if she recorded the chat. She says yes. The group discusses what the criminal could be trying to do. As they discuss it, Kogami warns Gino not to try too hard to understand the mind of a criminal, lest he be taken in. But Gino counters by asking if that warning is really for him, or if Kogami is reminding himself. Kogami says that he will trace the access routes into the chat room. As he does this, Masoka laments that he doesn't understand the virtual world. Akane tells him it's a tool like a kitchen knife or a net. It's neither good nor bad, but something people use. He goes on to talk about how humans are inherently social creatures, and things like letters, languages, and telephones are used to strengthen these social bonds. He asks Akane if she believes the internet to be a tool like this, and she says it is. Kogami begins playing back the conversation between Akane and Spooky Boogie. He notices that the terminology Spooky Boogie uses to talk about the police is different and begins searching back through past logs, finding that she refers to them as MWPSB for most of the conversations, but as the police in the most recent, and concludes that the Spooky Boogie Akane spoke to is actually a different person, a murderer who steals their victims' avatars and pretends to be them. Ginoza, Kagari, and Kunizuka go to where the talisman avatar was being operated from. Kagari accidentally sets off a motion detector bomb in the apartment. The killer gets a call saying that the trap has been set off, and that he can get the killer as many proxy servers as he wants, because he is Makishima's favorite. Kagari, Ginoza, and Kunizuka are informed of Spooky Boogie's murder. By searching through the records of people from Akane's class, and narrowed it down to people who had affiliate income, and found Shoko Sugawara had been murdered in the same manner as Hayama's case, but her avatar was still active online, and concludes from the time of her death that she must have been killed after the raid on the exoset. Akane laments that Shoko Sugawara was only involved in this because of her. Kogami assures her that it's not her fault, and that in failing to catch the killer during the raid, blame lies not on her, but on all of them. Back at the headquarters, Shion tells them that she has found another odd case. An old man's information has been used by his grandson, who had died in an accident half a year prior. But his avatar, Melancholia, is currently active. Akane says that the strange thing about the current avatars is that the user is a great actor, able to play multiple avatars at once, and becoming more popular with them than the original people were who were operating them. Kogami says this is not surprising, as these avatars were all idols, and that you do not become an idol because of your own ideals, but because of what you represent to your fans. So it's not surprising a fan could become the idol better than the original creator. He concludes that the murderer is a fan of all three victims' avatars. He tells Shion to draw a graph of the time spent on the talisman's commu field each day by the top 100 fans. He noted that after the murderer took over Talisman's avatar, most fans began spending more time on his commu field, but some did not. By using this pattern, he believed he could find the killer's own avatar because he wouldn't need to visit as a guest. Shion concludes that the killer is 27-year-old Masatake Mido. His last Psycho-Pass was checked 4 years ago, and Kunizuka says that if he's taken routes to avoid street scanners, he must have something to hide. Shion tracks his last web access to a hotel only a few minutes ago, near his home address. The team splits up, with Akane, Kogami, and Masoka, while Konizuka, Kagari, and Ginoza check his house. The team that goes to the hotel announces their presence, and Mido hits a button on a remote, activating psychedelic holograms throughout the room. Virtually invisible, Mido escapes the room. As he flees, Kogami points a dominator at him, but the holograms in the hallway become trippy as well. Masoka begins spitting strong alcohol through a lighter until the sprinklers go off, turning off the holograms, revealing Mido, who the dominator reads as a 335 crime coefficient, and goes into lethal mode, blasting his arm off as he rounds a corner. Kogami pursues him to a stairwell. Masoka joins him, noting that he is likely on pain-inhibiting drugs. Kogami says that with a wound like that, he will not be able to escape, and to leave him to the other group waiting in Mido's home. Mido rushes home and activates the holograms of the avatars he's stolen, and begins talking to them about how they're immortal now, that he's freed them from having a singular owner, and that he will protect them at all costs. He says he will guide the world with them. We see Makishima smile as he pushes a button on a keyboard, and the holograms become sinister, criticizing Mido, much to his surprise. Mido begins to yell at Makishima while having a breakdown, to not speak in the avatar's voices and to give them back to him, but Makishima says that their business together has come to an end, and that Mido is empty of any personality in and of himself, despite his ability to become someone else. The holograms tell Mido that the police are there to finish him off, and then deactivate as the team arrives, their dominators in lethal mode. Mido is promptly killed. They look around the house, concluding it's empty, but wonder who he had been talking to. Ginoza congratulates Akane on a job well done, but she says it was Kogami and his ability to figure out how Mido thinks that solved the case. Ginoza tells her that because of their own criminal tendencies, enforcers are able to do that. She's confused by this because Kogami had comforted her earlier, and so has trouble thinking that he has the same criminal tendencies as the people they hunt. Ginoza tells her to do her duty as an enforcer and draw a line between herself and the enforcers. She asks if this is a rule, and he says no, it's his own guideline, and that he had a partner once who made a mistake. He sends her a file which reveals that Kogami had once been an inspector before becoming an enforcer because he valued solving a case over therapeutic treatments, and his crime coefficient rose too high. The next episode begins with someone over the communicator telling Kogami to come back, but he insists that he needs to capture Sasayama. He finds a body and then wakes up in his bed, this all having been a dreamt flashback. We then see Ginoza being asked by the chief about Akane, and he says that she's doing a good job, but often acts unprofessionally due to her lack of experience. The chief worries that she will suffer the same fate as Kogami. She warns Ginoza to be careful himself, as he may be genetically predisposed to having a high crime coefficient, and that he should take care not to make the same mistake as his father. We then cut to someone named Satsuki Kuzahara reading Shakespeare out loud in her class. As she finishes, she receives a message asking if she's in class. The messenger tells her that Shakespeare is boring, but they do enjoy his particularly cruel tragedies. We then cut to Kagari cooking while Akane plays pinball. He asks her why she doesn't just use her inspector status to look at the files on Kogami, but she says he would be alerted to it and she doesn't want him to know. He then jokingly asks if she's in love with him, causing her to laugh and ask if he's ever been in love. He says he has not only been in love, but has done all sorts of bad things like drink alcohol. He then tempts her with some alcohol, saying he may reveal all sorts of secrets about himself if he gets drunk. They both get drunk, and he informs her that Kogami had already lost his inspector status when Kagari joined the force. So he was unsure of the details, but that the enforcer working under him had been killed on the job. His name was Sasayama, and that he had been killed in the same way as the victims, which sent Kogami's crime coefficient through the roof. He then informs her that the case has never been solved, but Kogami is still investigating it to this day. We then see Akane talking to Shion and Kunizuka. Shion informs her that she does indeed remember that Sasayama had been made into a biological specimen, his body preserved in resin, and that all of the murders in that case had been the same. The bodies preserved and put under a hologram in the entertainment district, and that when it was found, stress levels jumped by 4 in the area, and news coverage of it was banned. Shion goes on to explain that while investigating an unrelated disappearance of a teacher named Koutsubaru Touma, they found the plastination resin in his apartment, and ever since his disappearance, no new victims have arisen. So it has been concluded that he was as the culprit. Because the evidence was circumstantial, it's technically still an unsolved case. Shion also adds that while the suspect was thought to have knowledge of chemistry, Tuoma did not, and the mystery of who was making the resin to begin with remains unsolved. We then cut to a gloomy-looking Akane having lunch with her friends, who ask her if it's possible that Kogami and her are more similar than she initially thought. Before she can answer, she gets an urgent call from Ginoza and rushes to headquarters. We then cut to the school, where two girls are talking about how Satsuki Kutsahara is missing, and the teachers aren't allowed to talk about it because the school is a conservatory for girls to be sheltered from the world so that their psychopath levels don't get too high. One of the girls reveals that one of the teachers was a beautiful girl named Rikako Oryu enters the cafeteria to the delighted squeals of the other girls. One of the girls remarks to her friend that Oryu always frightened her because her eyes were often blank, like she was staring into another dimension. Oryu then shows up at their table to invite them to join the art club, of which she's the president. Oryu lets the girl know that she is often deep in thought and not looking into another dimension, and she is not an alien. Then she departs. Oryu is then seen painting as one of the girls enters the art room. Oryu asks the girl about her home life, saying she had been watching her for a while, and the girl breaks down in tears, saying her mother's new boyfriend is a creep who sneaks into her room while she's at school and looks at her with obscene eyes. Her late father passed, leaving them with a lot of debt, so she feels she can't speak to her mother about it because her mother cannot repay it without her new boyfriend. The girl tearfully admits that her psychopath was cloudy upon last inspection. Oryu smiles and tells her that the system forces them into lives that they don't want, and that she can show her how to be her true self. They embrace, and Oryu asks if she would like her to tell her more about Shakespeare. She tells her about Lavinia from Titus Andromedus, who was murdered and raped by her father. We cut to the headquarters where Ginoza is interrogating Kanahara about where he got the memory card that made the drone's attack. We cut to Shion explaining that from the safety protocol cancellation card and the hologram cracking program, she was only able to get a little bit of source code, but that they came from the same programmer. Ginoza confirms that both Kanehara and Mido were being backed by a professional cyber criminal. Masoka wonders why the professional criminal would have a motive to want to help Kanehara and Mido, but Kogami corrects him, saying that Kanehara and Mido have the motives, which is enough of a reason for this criminal to help them. Kogami then begins to have flashbacks to his dream, as he explains that you need the motive and the means to kill for a crime to take place, and that the criminal's goal is to bring those two normally separate elements together. Kogami storms off in a rage and begins pouring through case files, and Ginoza chases after him. Kogami insists that this is the same as the case with the resin, and that there's someone out there who provides people with a desire to kill, with a means to do it. Ginoza argues that with that case, it was a special resin used, whereas in these two cases, it's tools for cracking programs, and that this means the cases are unrelated. Kogami insists that there is a higher mastermind, someone who brings together the people with the motive and the means. He insists that Shinoyama was on the verge of figuring it out and vows revenge. Meanwhile, two maintenance men go to inspect a faulty hologram fountain. It vanishes, revealing what they initially believed to be a grotesque sculpture of a girl. They remark at how lifelike it is, and then we cut to Oryu painting this same sculpture. Makishima sits behind her and asks if she thinks Livia is happier now that she's been freed of her violated body. She remarks that she has many more paintings to make in the future. Oryu is visiting her catatonic father in the hospital. She internally laments that serenity is a type of death people yearn for, and that it will be around forever. We then cut to Akane, Kogami, and Ginoza looking at the resin-filled, mutilated girl's body. Ginoza says that he is taking Kogami off the case because he's worried Kogami is too emotionally invested to make objective observations about the case. Ginoza tells Akane that her job on this case is to watch Kogami and make sure he doesn't do anything rash. The dead body belongs to Satsuki Kutsahara. Misaoto notes that the academy Satsuki Kutsahara went to is where the suspected specimen case case killer, Kutsubaru Tuoma, taught. Kagari asks if it really was a good idea to take Kogami off the case, since he's the expert on it. But Ginoza insists that he has read all of Kogami's report and that it is delusional. We cut to Akane watching Kogami spar with a robot. He loses his temper and begins punching it repeatedly until she stops him. She's amazed at how skilled he is at fighting when she sees the robot was set to the highest level. As he grumpily smokes a cigarette, he catches her checking out his shirtless body. She asks if he really needs all that training if he has a powerful weapon like a Dominator. He says that he does, because with a weapon that powerful, he needs to be even stronger, because it needs to be him killing someone when he uses it, not the weapon. He also adds that he never wants to be in a situation where he has to fire the Dominator. She apologizes for snooping on his old case, and he tells her that he's not mad, and that the only person he can be mad at is himself for failing to even come close to catching the mastermind. At her request, he tells her about Sasayama, growing emotional at the brutality of his death. She asks if there are any leads from that case, and he gives her a blurry picture with the fire name Makishima. We cut to two girls at the academy talking about the death of Satsuki Kutsahara. The one girl says that she thinks something bad will happen if they do something, but that Uryu might know something. Uryu is in bed with a covered figure, telling it that her father uses images of dismembered bodies as art. She says he failed by stopping halfway through his duty to impact the world as an artist, and that she's picking up where he left off, pulling back the cover to reveal Yoshika. We cut to Makishima and another man in a hunting lodge, talking about the benefits of stress, and that once psychopasses became a thing, people removed stress so much that they removed their motivation for living, becoming as good as dead. He then explains that Uryu's father had created grotesque drawings of cruelty because he wanted to inspire people to be better. When psychopasses became a thing, mental health was checked by a machine, and he didn't need to create anymore, so he lost his reason for living. He embraced the new stress-relieving methods until he became like a living corpse. Uryu meets with the club owner from the previous episodes, referring to him as Koi Gusung, in a room under the school where she begins filling a tub with the resin. She remarks that geniuses always end up flocking to him, and Gusung is one of those geniuses. She also tells him to watch the news for her next surprise, and he holographically changes his clothes to look and sound like a schoolgirl before leaving. The team finds the body of the next girl before we cut to Uryu painting. One of the schoolgirls approaches and begins to ask about Yoshika, but pauses when she sees the painting Uryu is working on, of a naked Yoshika covered in thorns. Uryu knocks her out, and she wakes up staring at Yoshika in the resin tub. We see drones patrolling the academy as Makishima looks out the window and Uryu paints. He says that by only choosing students at the school, she has narrowed the police's search considerably, and asks her why she did this. She explains that the school is shaping them into antiquated ideas of being a lady, and that there are so many other ways they could bloom. We cut to the team investigating the school, and Kagari informs them that there are 2 second-year girls missing. They discuss whether it's even possible to get victims out with all the security, and wonder why he chooses victims at the school. Kunizuka suggests that because Kuoma, who they still believe is the culprit, used to work at the school, he may know a secret route to bypass security. Back at headquarters, Kogami and Akane look at the data, and while Akane thinks it proves the killer is the same culprit as 3 years ago, Kogami disagrees. He says that the way the victims 3 years ago were mutilated seemed to be sending a message. He also notes that the locations were very extravagant the first time, whereas this time around, the bodies have been in the park, and that, compared to 3 years ago, that is a boring location, and there's no twisted sense of humor or message in the killings this time, but instead look like works of art, but they lack originality. He begins to create a profile of the killer. Kogami and Akane go to a corrections facility to talk to an expert, believing that because the crimes lack originality, there is a source material they're working from. He explains as well that he will be put in that facility after he's no longer useful to the agency, and that anyone with a crime coefficient over 300 is kept there because a Dominator would immediately execute them if they left. The man in the cell tells them that the bodies look exactly like the art of Uryu's father, Roichi. They check the case file and find that Roichi's daughter attends the academy where the missing girls attend. We cut to the rest of the team at the academy, being surprised as Kogami walks down a pathway on campus. Kogami Kogami finds Uryu in the art room and points a dominator at her and finds her crime coefficient to be 472, sending the dominator into lethal mode. The principal attacks him and Uryu runs away. Masoka restrains the principal as Kogami pursues her. Gusung, disguised as a schoolgirl, hides Uryu, telling her that Makishima arranged him there to lead her out. Kogami has them run the security footage for the last few days to search for only Uryu. As they perform this search, Ginoza asks if Kogami knew from the start this was a different killer than 3 years ago, and he confirms that yes, he did, because Tuoma never would have picked the same location to display the bodies twice. They find footage of her going to the garbage disposal area, and the team finds the secret room. The lights turn on, revealing the 2 girls dead and made into a sculpture. We cut to Makishima listening to a recording of the conversation about how Kogami knew it was not Tuoma doing the killings this time around. Kogami finds that there is some damaged data in the security footage, and all of the art room footage had been corrupted, but he pulls the sound from one of them and hears Makishima's voice. Uryu is wandering the tunnels under the school and receives a call from Makishima, asking if she knows how she disappointed him. She says she does not, and he says that her growth has come to an end, and so he sends 2 robotic dogs to chase her as the man in the hunting lodge cheerfully puts on his hunting gear. Uryu's leg gets caught in a bear trap. As the hunter levels his gun with her head, she warns him that Makishima will discard him when he's bored of him, but the man smiles and assures her that she doesn't need to worry about that before shooting her. Makishima tells Gusung to gather the information on Kogami because he feels he will be a much more interesting toy.